Roshan Paul has led award-winning global impact entrepreneurship programs that have trained and guided over 10,000 people from 65 countries. And the interview with Roshan will focus on his leadership of the Amani Institute and the Climate Talent Initiative. Can you say more about what was the inception of the institute like? How did you get from the point of somebody must do something to knowing that what shape the institute needs to take?
Sure. Coming out of college, I decided to I'm from India originally, living in the US. Came to college in the US, and like most foreign students, I was looking at investment banks and management consulting firms when I graduated. But my senior year coincided with 9/11, and a lot of terrorist attacks in India as well, and then the US starting to bomb Afghanistan, and it just didn't make sense to me. So I turned down an offer with from McKinsey and moved back to India and started working in social entrepreneurship over there. And then built a career over about a decade, which included going to grad school. I was lucky to go to Harvard and then came out, continued working in social entrepreneurship. But then a series of things happened that I could get into if you want, but that made me realize that I'd learned so much more while working than I ever did in school. And then I was also speaking at a number of universities, a number of grad school programs, meeting lots of students, and realized that like I wouldn't hire any of the students I was talking to. And this was like from the best universities in the world. And I found other employers saying the same thing. And I thought if this is happening in the best schools, then what's it like, everywhere else as well, right? The best schools in the US, what's it like everywhere else in the world? And then I saw more and more people who wanted to work in social impact, and I built a career in this space and felt like I could help others to do it as well, right? So all the people who thought I was crazy for turning down McKinsey 10 years ago were now asking me, "Hey, how do I get a job? Doing working globally in social impact and so on, right?" So all of that together like led me to want to create a better kind of grad school program than the typical, a master's in public policy or peace studies or international development, things like that. Something less academic, more real world focus, less papers, more actual skills that you use on your job. And then everyone I mentioned it to said, "Hey, where was this 5 years ago? Where was this 10 years ago when I needed it?" And so that's how I knew this is something that like needs to exist and people really want to do it.
Very cool. And yeah, so over time, the Institute has grown to be very large and having diverse, wide reach. It has grown to support people doing impact work in many sectors and in many different countries. So, how did this type of growth inform the design choices you made in how you run the Institute or how it changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, so many changes. Like, so we started with this master's equivalent program. It was like a 6 month, very intensive certificate program that for us, we wanted it to sort of be an option for people to do instead of a traditional master's degree. And also to show universities a better model than, grad school. And that was what was driving me and my co-founder and our first, most important first key hire, who also came from the education space. But then the next generation of staff that we hired came from the private sector, and they couldn't care less about reforming education. They were more about like, how do we help each individual lead a more meaningful life, a more meaningful career, and so on. So they really started to like move the culture a little bit. And so that's when the orientation switched from higher ed to like individual, we call it careers of meaning and impact. That was our slogan. And then what happened was like we had organizations like big NGOs, foundations, universities come to us and say, "Look, I can't send one person to your course. I want you to come in and train my team, like train my staff, and so like more like consultancies, in-house capacity building programs." And that really started to grow. And it grew bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually became much bigger than our education programming. Around this time, we also started working with small businesses in Africa, but then scaled that to India and yeah, mostly to India. And those were then focusing on leadership development for middle and senior managers of small businesses. And then leadership development kind of became our bread and butter as well. So the consultancies and then the leadership development, and now all of that is much bigger than the certificate program. In fact, we've post-COVID we shut down the certificate, the master's kind of program, and it's like almost full time, fully now a consultancy capacity building model. And I mean, there's a lot of sort of business model-oriented stories, and lessons there about the way the field and the market grew over time, but we can get into that if you want.
Yeah, I actually would love to dive a little deeper. So what I'm trying to also get at is when you're doing work in so many different sectors and different countries, with different problems that need to be solved, different cultures and so on, I imagine that the skills you need to teach people may also need to be different. So how did you choose either like what are the common denominator skills that everybody needs, or how did you create a program that can teach them what they need in their specific context?
Yeah, so the main sort of insight was that like the most important set of skills are soft skills, like or human skills. It's not like more academic things like I don't know, international relations, but it's more like communication skills, or management skills. And that's like common across the board, no matter whether you're working in health, education, human rights, potentially even if you're working in a company. Those are the skills you don't get in grad school. You don't get in school, right? But those are the skills you use every day at your job. And there's this expression in HR and management, like people get hired for hard skills and fired for soft skills, right? And so we wanted to make sure people didn't get fired for soft skills. And also that as you go more senior in your career, soft skills is the difference between whether you advance or whether you kind of get stuck, like middle of the road. So we then felt that like if we can focus on soft skills, that is regardless of what like career people go into, what field people go into, those are going to be really important. And then we did a lot of research and surveyed employers and all of that stuff, and then came to four areas. So it was leadership, innovation, creativity, management, and communications. And so then everything we did kind of narrowed in on those. And of course, each of those, has like 10 or 15 sub skills, but those were what we decided to focus on. So we didn't do like anything more technical, focus mostly on sort of like human kind of skills. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And can you say a little bit about what were perhaps some of the design choices you made that allowed you to be very effective at teaching these skills to your people?
Um, we design choices that allowed us to be effective. So we focused on adult pedagogy, right? Again, ironically, not something that universities do. And we said, like, there was a set of design principles, like, it's been a while, so, but like adults learn by doing, I think. So that's one. So it's not about reading and then writing papers. It's really about like getting your hands dirty, like trying out stuff, failing, getting feedback, trying it again, things like that. So everything we did was sort of designed on real world application. That was one. Two was learning from actual experts who are actually using the tools that they're teaching, and not from academics who researched it, but don't have to actually manage teams or programs and things like that. And so learn from experts that are using the actual tools. So that was an important second one. Let's see what else. A third is to be in the places where the problems are, right? Like, so why do a master's program in London or New York or San Francisco, like when you could be in Nairobi or, Sao Paulo or Bangalore, like where the like actual, like, the cutting edge of kind of social problem solving is happening, right? And so we were global from the get-go. That was probably another fourth design principle, is that everything we do is global. And therefore, even more so, like most people come from, let's say, emerging markets to the US or Australia or the UK to study. We said, let's reverse that flow. Like, let's bring people from around the world to emerging markets and study over there. So in our office, we had an upside down map of the world. I don't know if you guys have seen all of that, or like that episode from The West Wing where they talk about turning the world upside down. And that's so like that was like one of our main sort of design, like, our wall decoration. And then we had an upside down map of the world, like trying to show that, where we should actually be learning. Those are a few, but came off the top of my head.
Very cool. Thank you. So let's talk about the outcomes of this. After 15 years of seeing this in action, what do you think you have learned about what types of systemic change this type of leadership development program can create versus where does one need a different approach other than like a direct training program?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think we started out wanting to change higher ed, right? Because higher ed is so broken. But apart from, I think, med school or law school or like architecture, maybe most masters are utterly useless and overly expensive, in my opinion. And so we were like, and the incentive structures within universities are another like absurd story. So that's how we started. But then this stuff is resilient, right? These systems have been around the university has been around for 400 years. And to some extent, I should be kinder to them as well. Like universities were never set up to prepare people for their careers. They were set up to be centers of learning for its own sake. It's only in the last like 50 years that we've been asking universities to do this other thing, which is like help people get a job. And like that's not what they are meant to do. And so they're bad at it. And all the incentive structures in universities are not aligned towards that, right? But at the same time, it's like completely permeated all aspects of society, and it's very hard to break that status quo and people's mindsets that we have to go to college and we have to do a master's degree. And so one lesson for us then is like if you want to take on something so entrenched, then it's really hard to break that down. And you need probably a combination of many, many things coming together. Like the right timing is probably the most important. But then, the right technology, a product, financing, etc. And that, we didn't succeed at changing higher ed, but we did succeed in having several universities like copy aspects of our program. And, some actively that we knew about that we consulted to them. Like when we started our first program, there was no masters in social innovation like anywhere.
Mhm.
And then within like 3 to 4 years of us starting it, the London School of Economics had launched one. The University of San Diego had launched one. And those are just the ones that we knew about because they told us that they had like looked at our model and tried to take some aspects of it. And with USD, we actually consulted to them on it. But others we know have taken some pieces of this. So it wasn't a complete failure, but like that was one thing. But I think you could take that as also one way of seeing, the energy transition to bring it home a bit to all of us here. Like it's so entrenched, right? Fossil fuels are in every single thing all around us, every aspect of our lives. And so breaking that dependency down will be very, very difficult, right? And so we have to throw everything we have at it, including people and talent, which is, I think, part of the raison d'être for both you and for me now.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Roshan. So, last question, real quick. You're now working on the Climate Talent Initiative. Can you say a few words about it and how has your experience with Amani Institute influenced the design choices of this one?
Yeah, so about the Climate Talent Initiative, one of the things that the philanthropy sector started to see was that grantees that they were investing in were not scaling. And they started to feel that one of the bottlenecks was people and talent. And then as I started to dig deeper into this, I realized that like climate philanthropy has invested in a lot of really important things like science and policy and finance and communications and so on, but has never really invested in talent and people that power these organizations to be able to grow. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to sort of solve for bottlenecks in the climate change sector to bring in needed talent in places where it doesn't exist, both at the sort of white collar leadership management level, but also kind of at the blue collar workforce development side of things as well, right? So that's kind of the big picture of what we're doing. We're very new, so it's about 8 months old, but like building on a 2 or 3 years of work. But us as a new institution, we're only about 8 months old.
Mhm.
And in terms of design choices, I mean, I always joke that I have done a startup without money and have done a startup with money, and with money is better. And so, that's one. I'd rather not do Amani Institute, we had no funding, like we never really did. And, we built a business from scratch. And I think that's something that, I think then also innovated several kind of aspects of our business model, like working extensively in the global south with people from the global south that reduced costs, made us like, especially on our consulting side, made us a lot more cost competitive than,
Mhm.
a lot of more like US or Europe-based organizations. So that's it. So I know how to work, like even if I live in DC now, I know how to work in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and I can run an organization and know the legal structures and all of that. And so I can innovate around business models and costs, I think, easier than others. Another thing is that like people, I know that people want to change their career to do more meaningful work. And so a lot of people don't believe that, but like I've seen that, and so we can, that like helps us to design programs that can really make that happen. And then lastly, I mean, or I should just caveat all of this by saying that Amani Institute was a social business. What I am now is like we're building more of philanthropy or operating foundation, and so it's like two different worlds too. So I shouldn't like can't take too much that's the same, but there are some lessons learned for sure.
So I'm just curious, what have you seen be the strongest arguments for people and talent?
Yeah, thanks, Murray. And I wouldn't say it's more important necessarily. I think that there's an arc of like the field's development, and initially it seemed like most of the climate space, the focus was making the case, right? That the climate is changing in ways that are going to be harmful. We need to act, like making that case. Now it seems like that case, well, apart from maybe the current administration, is pretty clear. It's pretty clearly made, and now we're moving into an era of implementation and um, making it actually happen, right? And in order to
Mhm.
do that, we need a different set of skills and a different kind of person. It's not just scientists, policy people, or movement and campaigners. It's also people from finance and HR and communications and program managers and so on. And that there's not an easy on-ramp for those kinds of people into climate. But the biggest argument is that the organizations that the philanthropists have been funding are not growing. They're not growing fast enough. They're kind of flailing about. And part of the reason is that they're not able to bring in or attract kind of talent that is not from the same sort of science or activist kind of places, right? So our argument is that we actually need a different, a broader base of talent. Nothing against
Mhm.
activists or scientists, like that was
Right.
important. It is still important, but we need to broaden the tent a little bit. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So have you mostly seen that philanthropies come to you with that viewpoint in mind, or is there anything where you have to convince them?
Oh, there's a lot of convincing that needs to be
Okay.
done. But they also, it's not a hard argument to get them to accept. But when it comes to, well, should I put money on this versus this? That's when it's a little bit
Mm,
more challenging. But yeah, I think for the most part, people accept the premise. Yeah.
got it. And Felix and Kirk, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. I have a couple more that I can go in with, but yeah, feel free to jump in.
I'll just jump in to like break
Sure.
it up a little. Roshan, you talked a lot about like the design of schools or universities and the transition. How do you think about like let's just say like universities or college or school or traditional education system that we've constructed all across the world is like the pipeline and the factory of talent. What are is there like secondary mechanisms? Are there any second, we've kind of gone to the wayside on trade schools or anything like that. But those are like I would say like an augmentation, like we're in a services economy and this becomes a larger discussion, all that. But I'm trying to keep it tight. But I guess what I'm trying to identify is like what are like some secondary mechanisms or anything that is beyond just the behemoth that is
Yeah.
that is traditional school, go to school, go to school, go to school, and that's it. And that's our only runway. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very hard to get out of doing an undergraduate degree, at least, I
Yeah.
think. But I think there's a lot more openness now around master's programs. And like, I mean, I'm not talking about trade related masters like med school
Mhm.
or law school, but like MBA or masters in public policy or, international development or international relations. There's increasingly a sense that we don't really like in hiring, for example, that people sort of underrate like what your master's degree was in, right? Like
Mhm.
whether you did one or not is interesting, but it's not really going to be a determining factor whether you get a job versus someone else based on your master's. And I think like that's not everywhere possibly, but like it's generally something that seems to happen. So I think that like so after your undergraduate degree, I think there's one really important thing is to have the mindset that that's the start of your education, not the end of it. And then, like how do you sort of buttress that undergraduate degree, realizing that that gave you a set of like mostly critical thinking and academic kind of skills, and you need to start to build other kinds of skills, like more real world or work related skills. And so, like creating intentional processes of reflecting on what you're doing at work and learning and like doing that. There's a cycle of adult sort of pedagogy, and where you reflect on it, you improve, and you do it again. And so that you're sort of putting yourself through those cycles a little bit is important. There's fellowship programs, there's other network kind of things that allow you to sort of keep growing and building your network and expanding your horizons and so on. So I think that's the alternative to trade schools in a way. And there's many other things that you can do, and you can design your own, masters in a way. Like when I was getting into climate, the last thing I was going to do was to go back to school, especially given everything I've just said. So I kind of created like a combination of I read a couple of books, I listened to a bunch of podcasts while I was, running, and I took one online course, or maybe two, and I talked to lots of people, and I like consulted and for a number of
Mhm.
organizations. And I would say putting that all together was like my climate masters, in a way that, not instead of going to school and getting it that way. So I think like looking at non other ways to think about your growth and education as a person is will give you other ideas than simply school.
Can I do one follow and then I'll hand it back to you, Murray?
No, no, of course. Go ahead.
In some a lot of ways, like education, going to a master's and then you go into a certain school, that's like a branding mechanism, right? Some kind of like functional branding mechanism. In your like kind of DIY way, I think that's all like the net result, the branding shortcuts thing. It's a shortcut effectively, right? That there's
Yeah.
some certification, quality control, or however you want to kind of frame it. Is there some ways like of the way you're saying I'm in agreement on is like the DIY, but is there a way where I think we've taken cracks at this as a society, like with Coursera or like Harvard Extension or things of that ilk? But is there any other way that you have seen or thought about this where it's like there's somewhere that we haven't tapped at this or attempted to get this to build a different ramp for folks?
I think two things are happening. So I heard someone once say you get three things from a master's program. You get knowledge,
Mhm.
network, and credential, right?
Okay.
But increasingly, all knowledge is available at the click of a button,
Yeah.
right? Like, and the networks you can get through other things. So the
Like
branding
this,
you
right?
said,
Like,
right?
yeah.
Like, is branding consists, I think, of two things. One is like the actual stamp, the credential, and then the second is the group of people you know as a result. Perhaps, right? It's also part of your brand. Look, I'm, friends with all
Yeah.
of these people in high society places and so on. That can, I think, be gotten through other means like fellowship programs, networks,
Mhm.
communities that you become part of, alumni from various jobs you've had, and so on. It's not the same as like a university thing, but like I've actually found that I have there was someone on the call that is a classmate of mine from grad school, and she's a good friend of mine. But like I would actually say my most useful networks have not been my grad school network or my undergrad network, even though I went to Harvard for grad school, right? It's been like fellowship programs and other things I did that have been much more useful to me professionally than my graduate school network was. And though I have great friends like Laura from my grad school program, but like not necessarily like the most professionally meaningful that's come from other ways. And the credential is the point I was saying earlier is that like that's I think devaluing compared to maybe 20 years ago or so where it was much more important as employers increasingly are kind of questioning what universities are putting out and feeling like and maybe even more so nowadays but back when I was starting my startup like it was already starting to be like not quite sure I'm getting like the talent that I need just because they have that stamp from the university
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's yeah, I guess just to close out the thought I was writing down that you kind of listed like with VCs is like the Kauffman Fellowship is like quite elitism in a way, but then what if is there an equivalency for Kauffman Fellowship to your point? Like, right, that just like builds a whole new network because all it really is a network, attaining a network and yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
really
and I
triggers.
imagine something like Y Combinator as well, right? Like, I
Right.
mean,
It's like you're
network
not
and
learning anything. It's
right.
access and network. You're not
Right.
learning physically something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead,
Thank,
Felix.
yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for being with us, Roshan. I'm Felix Zidahi, Community Programs Manager at Work on Climate. Um, I was wondering how you take what you learn from people and turn it into a program that they need, use, and are successful with.
Can you ask the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so actually I'll just drop it into chat as well because I put it there so I would remember. But like you had mentioned at the very end of your discussion with Eugene that you know people want to change their careers to do more meaningful work, and
Mm.
you and it helps you to design programs that will help people to do that. And so I'm wondering, what do you like, how do you do that process of learning what people need and then turning it into a program that they'll actually use and be successful with?
Yeah, I probably use the like don't necessarily do it very structured way, but the principles of design thinking to do that, right? Like innovation, like we have our own, like I'd created an innovation process that was built on design thinking, but added a few more things to it and sort of maybe intuitively go through that process, but it's essentially design thinking in a way. It's like you start with a problem, go deeper into it, understand why it exists more deeply than what's on the surface, and then design for that underlying thing, and design for what people maybe aspire to rather than like what they say they want. Sometimes there are a bunch of those kinds of principles, but yeah, I just find design thinking to be really powerful.